For generations, the phrase "the Nazca Lines" has encouraged one enormous question. Why would an ancient society create a single landscape of figures, lines, and shapes on this scale? But the most important recent discovery does not simply add more objects to that familiar mystery. It challenges the assumption inside the question, because the new evidence suggests that the figurative geoglyphs grouped under one famous name may not represent one uniform kind of monument encountered in one way for one common purpose. Some belong to a large line-type style, others belong to a much smaller relief-type style, and when researchers enlarged the field-confirmed evidence set, those categories began to separate not only by size, but by motifs, location, and their relationship to different routes across the desert. That does not solve the Nazca geoglyphs. It changes what must be explained. The question is no longer only, what were the Nazca Lines for? It is also this: what if different kinds of figurative geoglyphs were created, encountered, and possibly used in different social contexts? The number that opened this new investigation was 303, but those 303 were not 303 generic Nazca Lines. They were 303 newly confirmed relief-type figurative geoglyphs. Before the survey, the study inventory contained 430 known figurative geoglyphs, 50 line-type figures, and 380 relief-type figures. After the new field campaign, the figurative inventory rose to 733. The line-type count remained 50. The relief-type count rose from 380 to 683. So the value of the discovery was not merely that a catalogue became longer. The new figures greatly expanded the category that had previously been hardest to see and least completely mapped. That larger sample gave researchers a stronger basis for comparing what the two figurative styles tended to depict, where they appeared, and which landscape networks they were associated with. The 303 matter because they changed the balance of the evidence, so they made the smaller relief-type figures visible as a category at a scale that allowed patterns to emerge. And those patterns made one broad, universal Nazca purpose question less useful than a more careful comparison between different kinds of geoglyphs. The process began with aircraft imagery at an effective resolution of 10 centimeters, covering a study area of 629 square kilometers. The challenge was not that the desert lacked photographs, it was that small, weathered relief-type figures could be extremely difficult to distinguish across such a large landscape. Researchers used an image classification model that had been pre-trained on ordinary photographs and then fine-tuned for relief-type geoglyph examples. The model did not produce archaeological discoveries, it produced a probability map. That map was processed into 47,410 candidate boxes. Each box marked an area that might deserve attention. Then archaeologists screened those boxes visually. From tens of thousands of machine-generated possibilities, they selected 1,309 high-potential candidates and ranked them for possible field investigation. This is the first boundary that must remain clear. The AI accelerated the search. It narrowed a vast image field into a smaller set of places where human expertise could be concentrated. But every one of those 1,309 locations was still only a candidate. A probability on an image was not yet a geoglyph, and it was certainly not evidence of age, function, or cultural meaning. Between September 2022 and February 2023, the researchers moved from images to the desert itself. They visited 341 locations. The survey was conducted on foot for ground truthing under permission from Peru's Ministry of Culture. The fieldwork required 1,440 labor hours. Confirmed figures were documented with drone imagery. Only after that archaeological field process did the study report 303 newly confirmed relief-type figurative geoglyphs. Even then, the relationship between AI and discovery was not simple. Of the 303 confirmed figures, 178 had been individually suggested by AI candidate boxes. Another 66 were found within groups that researchers reached because AI had pointed them to at least one nearby figure. The remaining 59 were found during fieldwork or through screening outside the AI-suggested boxes without an AI suggestion at that specific location. So AI did not individually identify all 303, and the survey did not inspect every high-potential candidate. 968 promising candidates remained unsurveyed after the campaign. The research chain was therefore not AI saw 303 figures and humans agreed. It was AI generated probabilities. Archaeologists screened them. Field teams inspected selected locations. Human archaeological work confirmed and documented the result. The machine accelerated the route to evidence. It did not replace the confirmation gate. Once the field-confirmed set had expanded, the comparison could begin. The study separates geoglyphs into geometric and figurative classes. Within the figurative geoglyphs, it compares two styles, line type and relief type. This does not mean that every feature across the Nazca landscape belongs to only two universal categories. The distinction concerns the figurative geoglyphs analyzed in the study, and the source labels must be handled carefully. Line type does not simply mean a straight geometric line. Relief type does not mean a raised sculpture standing above the ground. They are archaeological style classifications used by the researchers. Detailed construction mechanics are not needed to understand the central evidence, and they are not established here beyond the source-controlled style distinction. What matters for this documentary is that the two styles can be compared across several observable dimensions. They differ strongly in average scale. They tend to depict different kinds of motifs, and they appear in different spatial relationships to the networks that cross the Nazca Pampa. The familiar umbrella name remains useful for recognition, but analytically it can hide differences that the enlarged evidence set has made much harder to ignore. The first separation is scale. The study reports that line-type figurative geoglyphs average about 90 meters in length. Relief-type figures average about 9 meters. That is an average difference of roughly 10 to 1. But averages are not absolute borders. Not every line-type figure must be described as gigantic. Not every relief-type figure must be described as small. The evidence supports a category-level contrast, not a rule without exceptions. This difference matters because scale changes the conditions under which a figure can be detected, approached, and compared with its surroundings. The large line-type figures were already more visible in earlier aerial studies. The smaller relief-type figures were harder to identify across high-resolution imagery and became the main target of the AI-assisted search. Scale therefore explains part of why the known inventory was uneven. It also becomes one piece of the later viewing context interpretation. But scale alone does not prove who saw a figure, why it was made, or how it was used. Here, size is not spectacle. It is evidence that the figurative geoglyphs grouped under one name were not all operating at the same physical scale. The categories also differed in what they tended to depict. Among the 50 line-type figurative geoglyphs in the study inventory, 64% depicted wild animals. The enlarged relief-type inventory showed a very different pattern. 81.6% depicted humans or things modified by humans. That total included 33.8% humanoid figures, 32.9% decapitated heads, and 14.9% domesticated camelids. Wild animals accounted for only 6.9% of the relief-type figures. These differences are important, but they do not translate themselves. A repeated image of a human, a head, a camelid, or a wild animal is an observed motif. It is not a recovered sentence from the people who made it. The study can compare distributions. It can show that one style tends more strongly toward wild animal imagery, while the other tends more strongly toward humans and human-modified subjects. It cannot, from motif alone, tell us the exact symbolic meaning of an individual figure. The pattern strengthens the case that the two categories may have belonged to different practices or contexts, but the inner cultural message remains unresolved. The strongest bridge from category difference to possible human use comes from location. The researchers mapped line-type figurative geoglyphs in relation to the network of straight lines and trapezoidal geoglyphs. On average, the line-type figures were 34 meters from the nearest line or trapezoid in that network. Relief-type groups showed a different association. They were found, on average, 43 meters from winding trails that cross the pampa. Those distances are observations. They establish recurring proximity. They do not establish purpose. The trail evidence also carries limits. The mapped trail network is incomplete. Not every member of a relief-type group is necessarily visible from a trail. In some groups, one figure may become visible first, while others appear only after a person moves closer. The analysis also used a distance cutoff when comparing figures with the partially mapped trails, so the landscape does not divide into a perfect binary. Still, the contrast is substantial. Large line-type figures cluster near the formal network of lines and trapezoids. Smaller relief-type groups cluster near winding paths produced by repeated movement across the desert. Before asking what those patterns might mean, the evidence must remain in the correct order. First, the mapped association. Only then, the interpretation. The measured distances allow the study authors to propose different viewing and encounter contexts. For relief-type figures, the authors suggest that people may have encountered them while walking along informal winding trails. Because many were close to those paths and because some could be recognized from them, the figures may have entered human experience gradually and at close range. A person or a small group could approach one figure, then encounter others as movement continued. For the much larger line-type figures, the authors connect their placement to the broader network of lines, trapezoids, and major routes. That relationship is consistent with a more collective spatial setting. But this is where the evidence changes class. The average distances are measured observations. The possible experience of a walker, a small group, or a community is an interpretation built from those observations. The pattern can support a plausible context. It cannot prove the intended audience of every figure. It cannot tell us that every relief-type geoglyph was meant for a traveler, or that every line-type figure was meant for a public gathering. The study makes the human setting more imaginable. It does not make intention directly observable. From those spatial and motif patterns, the authors propose different possible social functions. They suggest that line-type figurative geoglyphs associated with a linear and trapezoidal network were probably built and used at a community level for ritual activities. For relief-type figures, the authors propose a more individual or small group context. Their proximity to winding trails, together with the dominance of human and human-modified motifs, may be consistent with sharing information about human activities among people moving through the landscape. These are study-supported interpretations. They are not direct observations of ancient behavior, and they do not justify replacing one universal purpose with two universal purposes. A category-level pattern does not mean that every member served the same function. A figure could have operated at more than one social level. Its use could have changed over time. The surviving pattern could also reflect preservation, detection, or survey limits. What the evidence supports is more careful than a final answer. It supports the possibility that different figurative styles belonged to different encounter contexts and different kinds of social practice. That possibility makes a single explanation for all Nazca geoglyphs increasingly difficult to defend, but it does not recover the precise purpose of any one figure. The new research leaves us with 4 different levels of knowledge. First, the process is confirmed. Researchers used 10-centimeter aircraft imagery, AI-assisted probability mapping, archaeological screening, on-foot field survey, and drone documentation. Second, the result and the observations are confirmed. The field campaign confirmed 303 new relief-type figurative geoglyphs. The known figurative inventory rose from 430 to 733. Line type and relief type figures differ strongly in average scale, in the motifs they tend to depict, and in their measured associations with different landscape networks. Third, the interpretation is study-supported but not proven as final purpose. The authors propose that line-type figures may relate to community-level ceremonial activity, while relief-type figures may have been encountered by individuals or small groups moving along trails and may have communicated information about human activity. Fourth, the cultural remainder is unresolved. The study does not individually date most of the 303 figures. It does not prove the intended audience of each image. It does not recover the maker's own category names. It does not decode the exact meaning of the humanoids, heads, animals, or scenes, and it does not establish one fixed function for either style across centuries. The new evidence has not made Nazca less mysterious by returning us to the old question. It has made the mystery more precise. The confirmed process tells us how the evidence was found. The confirmed figures tell us that the known sample was incomplete. The patterns tell us that one umbrella name can conceal different kinds of practice. The interpretations suggest how those practices may have operated, but intention and cultural meaning remain beyond current proof. The mystery did not disappear. The unit of analysis changed.